I alluded to this in the previous retrospective video. I suggest watching that one first if you haven't yet, but I'm not really a fan of Zelda 2. It's not for lack of trying. I told you I grew up on the NES, and while I still have pretty fond memories of Zelda 1, I also devoted a lot of time to trying to play that classic sequel and just never got much further than the first dungeon. Sorry, Palace. It follows a strange trend around that time of following up a successful new IP with a more experimental sequel. Castlevania did it in a similar way by adding more RPG elements, though it at least retained its basic gameplay structure from the first game. And Final Fantasy II also decided to break what didn't need fixing by introducing a progression gimmick where your characters raise their HP by attacking each other, for example. And I mean the actual Final Fantasy II, not the Final Fantasy II that America got. Even Mario followed up its arcade classic with a weird and experimental fever dream of a game with multiple playable characters that all have their own abilities. Now, that one only slightly counts since the actual Mario 2 was very much more of the same, and just didn't come out in the US until years later. But still, it's kind of funny to look at how many classic Nintendo series tried something new with their second entries, with mixed results. I think Zelda 2 is the most divisive of them all, though, as it fundamentally changed the gameplay from a more top-down, non-linear hack-and-slash RPG to a side-view platformer RPG with mostly linear progression and a much more obtuse story structure. I'm pretty sure it's also the only one not called The Legend of Zelda. It's just called Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link, and that's weird by itself. Anyway, despite having a lot more interactable NPCs with dialogue boxes, the hints they give are so cryptic that it's hard to ever know where to go next, which isn't ideal in a game that existed before the internet. Guess they wanted the Nintendo customer service agents to get their money's worth on the helpline. Anyway, all that is to say, I can't in good conscience objectively critique this game. I just flat out don't like it. I even got further than I've ever gotten before on this playthrough, thanks to a quality of life mod and a very thorough guide, now that the internet does exist, and I still am hard-pressed to find anything positive to say about it. But I hate those videos that are super negative and just needlessly rip into games, so rather than just skip this game in the retrospective, I thought I'd take a different approach. I've brought some friends along with me, and we're going to look at the three sides of this game: the good, the bad, and the ugly. I've got the ugly, obviously, but let's welcome my friends VGPlays and WallyWallcakes, who will be handling the good and the bad, respectively. I've already been pretty negative in this intro, so it seems only fair we start with the good. Take it away, VG.
Zelda 2 is a perfect game, and I will not abide this slander. Okay, perfect is probably too strong a word, but maybe I can offer some insight on what this game does well. I'm not being hyperbolic when I say this is one of my favorite games. Like a lot of gamers of a certain age, I hated this game the first time I played it, and the second time I played it, and the 100th time I played it. It wasn't until I earnestly sat down with it in college and played it from start to finish that I realized the hidden genius of Zelda 2. Now I'm here again to defend it from good-hearted people with perfectly valid opinions whom I love and respect. So, what do I love about this game? It dared to be different. It dared to get weird. Rather than just rehashing the first game and making a straight-up sequel to The Legend of Zelda, Nintendo did the thing that they love to do: change and innovate. In so doing, Zelda 2 left its indelible mark on the series. Zelda 2 introduces many RPG elements that would later become staples of the series. It was the first in the series to use magic spells and a magic meter, the first to introduce full towns of NPCs, cryptic clues, and fetch quests, and the first time we saw a story with more pathos than get the girl, save the world. Not much more pathos, but it's also the first time you fight Shadow Link. Like it or not, this is where Zelda truly became Zelda. When you think about a traditional Zelda game, what comes to mind? Going to dungeons, collecting items, eventually getting some part of the Triforce, all while helping townspeople with their struggles along the way? Zelda 2 has all of that and more. Most of what you need to know throughout the entire game gets laid out in the first 10 minutes. Exploring the overworld, you'll find that you can only go so far in any direction before you hit various roadblocks. Caves are too treacherous to explore in the dark, and any other path is a literal roadblock, which means the towns are the best place to start your adventure. Every town has a few things. Someone to fill your health, someone to fill your magic, and a wise man. Generally, talking to the wise man means completing a quest upon which he will grant you powerful magic. Most of this information can be learned just by talking to the NPCs in town. It is an RPG, remember? A lot of them don't have much to say. Some of them are outright confusing. But there are several NPCs in every town that give you helpful hints about what to do next. Remember those roadblocks? Well, they can be destroyed by a hammer. And those dark caves? You can find a candle in Parappa Palace. One NPC straight up tells you not to go south without a candle. Now, admittedly, the clues can be clumsily worded and confusing, but this is the NES. And that is everything you need to know to complete Zelda 2. Okay, obviously there's more nuance to it than that, but this game is a lot more straightforward than Zelda 1. Where Zelda 1 is more open and the player doesn't necessarily need to play the dungeons in order, Zelda 2 is more focused and linear. Not only does the game funnel you to the first dungeon before it lets you do much else, most of the remaining dungeons are unlocked or accessible after getting the item from the previous dungeon. And there's no question if you finish a dungeon, because once you get the item and defeat the boss, it's closed for good. The biggest change from Zelda 1, and the thing that stands out the most about Zelda 2, this is a side-scrolling action RPG, and this fundamentally changes combat for the better. Combat in Zelda 1 can be broken down to stick the pointy end in the other man. Combat in Zelda 2 is not nearly so simple. You start the game with no more than a sword and a jump to your name, but oh, it is a mighty jump. Nobody can stand up to the power of the jump slash. This one trick isn't the only one you'll have in your arsenal. In addition to the magic spells in each town, some are home to knights who will teach you powerful techniques, giving you a greater edge. At first, the scariest enemies you'll face are a few quivering blobs and overly aggressive bats, and they can be dispatched with a few quick swipes of the sword. Dungeons, however, are guarded by much more fearsome foes that require a little more thought. You can just throw yourself at them and hope brute force wins the day, but if you want to survive the later dungeons, you're going to have to learn to dance. This game is hard. You're going to die a lot. But I'm the kind of person who likes a challenge, likes to get beat up and come back again. The challenge is a big part of the appeal of Zelda 2. The RPG style leveling means if you find an area too difficult, you may just need to get stronger and come back later. Or just keep bashing your head against the wall and make yourself stronger in the process. The overworld is a great place to grind. Groups of enemies will spawn around you as you walk, and overworld sprites make it easy to distinguish if it's an easy or difficult encounter. Plus, there's a chance to encounter a fairy that refills your health. And if things get too dicey, you can always retreat to the path where no enemies will spawn if you start an encounter. And there's a great sense of risk versus reward in Zelda 2. Every dungeon has a statue at the entrance, and early dungeons will always give you a large red magic jar. Later dungeons, however, there's a 50-50 chance to spawn a red iron knuckle. It's worth the risk fighting one of the toughest basic enemies in the game for the chance to refill your magic. In worst case scenario, you get a bunch of experience. Dungeons in general are the best place to gain levels, since they are home to many tough enemies who will test your skills and drop huge amounts of experience. Not only that, defeating the boss will automatically take you to the next level, so there's an element of strategic grinding. Along with dungeons comes puzzles. Puzzles in Zelda 1 usually involve defeating all of the enemies in the room, pushing a block, or blowing up a wall. Sometimes a combination of all three. Zelda 2 asks more of your wits than just placing a bomb and hoping it makes a hole, or burning every single bush on a screen until you find the hidden entrance. That's not to say that the puzzles can't be obtuse. For example, Dungeon 5 hides the item, and therefore progression, behind a fake wall. Without knowing that, the player could obviously get pretty stumped about how to move forward. Well, like any good RPG, the answer is usually right in front of you. There is an NPC in one of the nearby towns that, again, straight up tells you that there is a false wall in this dungeon. Okay, sure, you still have to find the right wall, but part of the fun is the journey. It doesn't solve the puzzle for you, but it points you in the right direction. That's the thing this game does best. It points you in the right direction and teaches you. NPCs give you hints without outright bludgeoning you over the head with the answer. Items open new paths to explore rather than filling up your inventory. The secret genius of this game is how hard it is to get to certain milestones on your first trip. Death Mountain is a confusing, difficult trek, but once you get the hammer, you never have to go through that path again. The overworld is designed in a way that makes it extremely straightforward to get back on track should you lose all your lives. The trouble is, if you don't get those items before you lose all your lives and get a game over, it is a pain in the ass to get back. Okay, the lives are bad. They attempt to solve a problem that didn't really exist. Losing a life on its own isn't bad, usually just putting you back at the beginning of the room you were in. Getting a game over can be extremely punishing, sending you all the way back to the beginning of the game. The only exception is the final dungeon, but getting there involves going through 6 action scenes and a couple of caves. You'll be lucky if you make it all the way there with all of your lives. It seems like an odd choice, but it's definitely intentional. As long as you get the dungeon items, no other dungeon requires traversing this many enemy encounters and death traps to get back where you left off. Again, it's a solution to a problem that didn't really exist, but the creativity of it is what makes it engaging. What I love about Zelda 2 is how unlike other Zelda games it is. It takes the foundation of exploration and adventure laid down by Zelda 1 and builds a creative, unique action RPG. It's not always a perfect experience, but the things that work well inform the DNA of the series to this day. The charm and appeal of Zelda 2 lie in the challenge. When Zero Score asked me if I'd like to contribute to this video, I jumped at the opportunity. Every time I play, I find something new to love about it. I like a game that isn't afraid to tear you apart. I like a game that makes you think. Zelda 2 is one of my favorite games because it offers a challenge unlike many others that makes you think outside the box, teaches without holding your hand, and forces you to get good or get dead.
And that's exactly why I brought guests along. That was so much more generous than I could have been, even though I honestly agree with some of those points. I'm just so jaded by my hatred of actually playing the game that I couldn't see the positives on my own. But now we'll kick it over to Wally, who is a bit more forgiving with his critique than me. But, not by much.
I'll be completely honest. Prior to being a part of this video, I hadn't really played Zelda 2 in any capacity for a very long time. Many years, in fact. I'd seen videos on it, some good, some bad, and so when I sat down to play this again, I decided to come at it with a fresh set of eyes. Fresh in the sense that I was going to pretend it was 1987 all over again. No magazines, no internet, no walkthroughs, just walk in blind, like I was a kid, and see what I could experience. And let me tell you folks, I am not a fan. I admit, at my age, I'm getting soft when it comes to playing video games, and I'm not as down for a challenge as I used to be, apparently. But there's challenge in terms of gameplay and fine motor skills, and then there's exploration challenge. Both are fine, but considering all that, Zelda 2, to me, is not very enjoyable. Sure, it's pretty linear, there's only so many places you can go initially, though I suppose that really you can go anywhere, it's just a matter of how quickly you want to die. Traverse the overworld and run into bad guys, cool, nothing too over the top there. You find baddies, you fight them, and you earn experience points to level up. Only sometimes when you run into enemies, there's no enemies to fight. Maybe there's some back-end programming reason why enemies don't show up, be it on purpose or accidentally, but it's a reoccurring incident that often makes you sit there and scratch your head. Let's also talk a little bit about the experience points that you earn. Like many games, you level up your skills after defeating bad guys and gaining experience points. Leveling up skills can lead to greater magic, better health, a stronger attack. You know all this, I don't need to explain it to you. But boy oh boy is Zelda 2 a grind. Not in the overall sense, but when it comes to getting experience points, it's a long road. When you defeat enemies, you do gain experience, but 2 experience points here and 5 experience points there. It's not so bad in the early parts of the game when you only need to reach, say, 100 points. And sure, you can find these P bottles that give you some extra experience, but when you get upwards of 500 points you need to earn or more to get that next upgrade, that's a lot of enemies to defeat to level up. I ran into this area where enemies just happened to respawn infinitely, so I took advantage of this situation. But even then, it was a grind just to get to that next level. Oh, and one thing I didn't mention, sometimes enemies just don't offer up any experience points at all, and that can be a little frustrating. The towns are fine, but they're all the same. Same garish brick and mortars with inept NPCs, and they contribute very little to your quest. I know nothing. Hello, and we all remember this fella. To be fair, talking to everyone in town is advantageous, and you should do it, because they do offer up hints as to what to do next. Take for example this young squire, who tells you fire will help you see in the dark. There are other instances where these hints can offer up some subtle clue as to what's next, but it's up to you to figure out what it means. Some are simple, some might be more complex. Again, it all depends on how you decipher what they're saying. For someone nowadays, that might be fine, and for others who like a little bit more black and white with their clues, they might interpret it as not being enough. My biggest gripe with Zelda 2 is the enemies. Yes, some are simple in nature, but given the mechanics, the hit detection, and the kickback you endure while engaging these enemies, it's a bit of an exercise in frustration. You can quite literally lose half or more of your life in a battle with some random enemy, and when trying to advance to the next screen, it can be a little off-putting. The experience system is fine, as I mentioned previously, but it's not without its own challenges. Sure, anything you achieve in terms of experience sticks with you when you die, as long as you save, remember that. But if you die 3 times, you'll be greeted by this haunting vision of Ganon, with 0 experience points earned when you start up again. Total experience and skill improvements, you can keep those, but 3 strikes in 1 playthrough, and you can start earning 2 points at a time all over again. Like I mentioned, just remember to save before you shut off the game. Zelda 2 is not the worst game I've played on the NES, but it's far from my favorite. To be transparent, I'm not even the biggest fan of the Zelda franchise. I enjoyed the original, but I haven't played a whole lot in the franchise, despite owning almost every Zelda game over the years. I bought them with intentions to play because it's Zelda, right? Playing this back for the first time in a long time, it just wasn't an enjoyable experience for me. I found it difficult in areas where it didn't need to be difficult, and I questioned some of the mechanics and changes from the original iteration. Now, I know there are those who are watching this right now who are saying, "Get good, noob," or "Be better, it's not that hard, you just suck." There are also those who are more encouraging in nature, saying, "It's not so bad, it's a wonderful story about exploration and uncovering clues to complete the ultimate experience through Hyrule. Give it some more time and a little bit of effort, and you too can enjoy navigating Link throughout his journey." And you know what? Both are probably right. I'd like to thank Zero Score for asking for my thoughts on this game, but I don't think I'm going to. It might be a while before I forgive you for asking me to play Zelda 2 again, so thanks for nothing.
Alright, Wally, thanks for that. I promise I'll never ask you for anything ever again. Though your delicious hatred does sustain me. But with that, I guess it's my turn to rip this game a new one. Like I said, I do understand how people could see the good in this game. Historically, I'm glad it exists because it did establish some gameplay mechanics that would help evolve future Zelda games, such as the magic system, towns named after future sages, and more complex dungeon layouts with platforming and puzzle elements. But man, as far as the implementation of that stuff in this game is concerned, it's just not done well at all. I want to preface by saying I once again am using the Zelda Redux mod, which I think is just as good, if not better, than the Zelda 1 Redux. It updates some sprites and adds more frames of animation and stuff, but mostly it reworks some of the NPC text boxes to be more helpful, and makes the arbitrary lives system persist after game over. What does any of that mean? Well, one of the stupidest things this game does is implement a lives system, like most other side-scrolling platformers of the time. You have 3 lives where, on death, you'll spawn at the last checkpoint. Usually the beginning of a palace or the first room of whatever area you died in. On a game over, it's right back to the beginning, looking at Zelda's stiff sleeping corpse. Before you're able to complete a few palaces and open up the game map a little more, this is insanely brutal because of the amount of backtracking required to get to where you were. If you can even get back there on the same number of lives. And it's also frustrating because early on in the game you probably don't have much life or defense, so it's a bit like Sisyphus rolling a rock up a hill. Except that rock could very easily be destroyed by the hammer you don't have yet. In the normal game, you acquire these angel statue things that seemingly don't do anything. Despite an increase in dialogue boxes, key pickup items still tell you nothing, so unless you consult the manual, you'll have no idea that these are actually extra lives. But there's a finite number of them in the game, like 5 or something, I can't be bothered to look it up, and they don't persist through a game over. So if you use the extra lives and then game over, you'll start back at the beginning with 3 lives again, no matter how many you had before. How does that make sense? What benefit do they really serve then? It's not like Mario, where you can get more by collecting 100 coins. This game doesn't even have rupees, now that I think about it. It's bafflingly stupid. Sorry, got a little angry there. The best thing about the Redux mod is that it makes those statues permanent increases, so you could end up with a lot more lives if you find them all, making game overs much less frequent. But I'm not judging the game based on these modern conveniences. They were just to try and help me actually get through the game for once. And guess what? I still couldn't. There's not enough quality of life improvements, save states, and rewind features in the world to make this game fun to play. The only time it's slightly tolerable is in the palaces, because they have some interesting platforming elements, but even then, most are ruined by some kind of persistent enemy that just slows progress to a crawl, as you either constantly kill them or try to avoid them and most likely take damage, leading to more deaths, and you see where I'm going with this. This game really feels like the devs took all the worst parts of Castlevania and melded them with the basic elements of Zelda. It's like a Zelda-flavored LaCroix. Some other studio is developing an actual Zelda sequel in the building next door, and some ex-Castlevania devs got a whiff of what they were doing and decided to make their own, which Nintendo went with instead. You know, I actually wish this game was a Mario 2 style origin story of being some unrelated IP that they slapped the Zelda branding onto. Because then that would mean that there's some other, more faithful Zelda 2 out there I could play instead. Not that the Lost Levels was particularly good either. I actually like the Mario 2 we got, but it's called a metaphor. Jeez. The other weird change to this game is the experience-based level system, where enemies and certain pickups give Link points toward leveling up his life, attack, or magic. Funny enough, the Redux mod says it improves the EXP rate by about double, but it still felt like I was constantly underpowered. So I can't imagine how poorly balanced the base game's experience rate is. Though it sounds like the others had plenty to say about that. Enemies hit like trucks, and Link's little dick sword can barely reach the next tile in front of him, so combat is just super not fun until you eventually get the downward stab. And that move is awesome, but it's also just another one of those things that's frustratingly well hidden and unlocked way too late. But even with it, most encounters just end up being a game of teabag stab as you bob up and down while tapping the sword button to whittle down shielded enemy HP. The only defense, aside from an unreliable shield, is Link's collection of spells he unlocks throughout the game. And some of these are pretty cool, but they also feel like they should be permanent upgrades considering the expensive magic cost to use them. One, for example, is the Shield spell, which doubles your defenses but only for the screen you're currently on. So while it's not very expensive to use once, if you want to keep it on, you're just activating it each time you scroll to a new screen, and that's just kind of silly, especially when it looks like a colored tunic. Just give Link a tunic upgrade. Another is the Jump spell, which allows you to leap up over tall walls and obstacles. This one is quite a bit more expensive and is also required for progress at multiple points. So if you've been using other spells, not knowing what's to come, and then you run out of magic and literally hit a wall, guess you better hope you can backtrack until you find some pots of magic refill. And yes, limited magic meters are a problem in Zelda literally from this point on, but future games have more regular magic pickups, fillable bottles, and other ways to offset the issue, as well as just a more forgiving difficulty curve to most of the games that prepare you for any situation when magic is required. This game is just so painfully difficult, even in this refined Redux form, that I don't see how anyone would have fun playing through it. Unless they hate themselves. Some people love torture. Since Wally already covered some of the negative points I had, I just want to talk about one more frustration before we end it. The world map. The only time this game actually looks like the traditional top-down Zelda view is on the world map. But instead of going around burning bushes and bombing walls to find secrets and dungeons, you just kind of wander aimlessly until you find the random tile that takes you to a progress room. There's multiple points where I didn't know where to go next. Consulted my guide, and it just said, walk in this area until you find the tile that teleports you. It should be the second from the bottom, fifth from the left, or something like that. And just like, Why? You have a tile set available. Do something to distinguish areas of importance. Sometimes it'll have an obvious town tile or a cave entrance, and then other times it's just wandering until the screen changes. There's a few times when I thought the game died because it just went to a black screen and then popped up somewhere else, and I had no idea that I had transported to a new room. And during that whole time, wild encounters will pop up that could leave you disoriented about where you left off once you're out of it. And even the seemingly obvious areas are still a nightmare to explore, like Death Mountain, where you get the aforementioned hammer. This is basically an interconnected series of maze-like caves where some are dead ends, some just take you to the wrong place, and there's only one right path through it to get to the end. But even the right path takes you through a ton of caves full of tough enemies where you might possibly die and then get game overed back to the beginning. And since it's on the way to the hammer, you can't even break the shortcut block to easily get back to Death Mountain. It's maddening. I don't think there's any hint in the game about the correct path either, so you just keep going. Maybe make your own map on a piece of parchment paper like they did back in the day, but still, it sucks. I actually quit here when collecting footage, but then decided maybe I do hate myself and gave it another try. Finally got through by cheesing save states, got the hammer, opened up some new paths, did another palace, which was okay except for the awful seizure-inducing background, got access to a whole new continent, and then questioned why I was even bothering. None of what I'd done up to that point had been fun. It felt like I was just continuing out of obligation to get footage and more bad memories of a game I don't like so I could shit on it for a video. And like I said, I don't like doing that, but this game brings out the worst in me. If this was all I had as a kid, I don't think I'd even like Zelda now. Games were expensive back then. Would I really risk trying another game that I might not like in the series? But luckily, when I was growing up, we had an NES and SNES at the same time, so I could play the first 3 Zeldas in order. And wow, was Zelda 3 a huge improvement over this trash. It was not only a return to form for top-down Zelda gameplay, but an evolution in every way. Largely thanks to the new hardware. But that's a story for next time. For now, thanks again to VGPlays and WallyWallcakes for coming on this journey with me. It's nice that at least one person in the world enjoys this game and can provide a positive perspective. I'm just glad to be done with this game so I can move on to ones I enjoy more. So until next time, play literally anything other than Zelda 2. Ugh. The only time it's slightly tolerable is in the palaces, because they have some interesting platforming elements, but even then, most are ruined by some kind of persistent enemy that just slows progress to a crawl. This game is putting me to sleep. It's nice that at least one person in the world enjoys this game and can provide a positive I can't even say anything nice.